Tonight we have a very special event. I'd like to welcome you all here to this event. I'd like to welcome all of those people who are on Zoom. This event has been Zoomed and there will be a recording of this afterwards for those who are not able to attend. So, welcome to you all. Thank you for coming. Welcome to Archbishop Patrick O'Regan for coming this evening. Welcome to Bob. Where is Bob? Over there. Today is a special event when we honour and celebrate the work of Bob Wilkinson in the Adelaide Archdiocese and also nationally in various forums and internationally as well. Today is also a special event because we are launching a new publication by ATF Press. It is not a book in the technical sense in publishing, but is an edition of our journal called Cardine Studies. It's a special issue of this because it is a series of interviews with Bob that have been edited to form the journal. As an edition of the journal, the editor of the journal and the publisher of ATF Press takes full responsibility for the final product that we have here today. And there is a history to this publication. It began nearly 5 years ago when I did a series of interviews with Bob one-on-one, taking notes, but then that didn't work terribly well. So when Zoom came in during the COVID crisis, we then did 12 Zoom interviews. And they were revised and edited, and some of the people who are in this room here tonight assisted in that process. So for tonight's event, we'll hear from Archbishop Patrick O'Regan. Then we will hear from Ruth Eagar, who has worked with Bob for many years. And then we will hear from Carmel Brown, who worked also with Bob for many years, who's come to this event this evening from Melbourne. She worked at the YCS and the tertiary YCS. So I'll invite the Archbishop to come and say a few words.
Thank you, Hilary, and good evening to everyone. Tonight, I have 3 points, and I'd like to begin these short comments thinking about soup. It's not because we're about to eat something, but I'd like you to consider soup. Sometimes it's an entree, sometimes it's called by one name: chicken soup, mushroom soup, pumpkin soup. Soup always nourishes and gives life. But there's another kind of soup, minestrone, a thick soup of Italian origin, made with lots and lots of vegetables, often with the addition of pasta and rice, sometimes both. And the ingredients are varied: beans, onions, celery, carrots, leafy vegetables, stock, Parmesan cheese, and tomatoes. Anyone hungry yet? Now, one of the great things about minestrone is that there's no actual set recipe, since it can be usually made from whatever vegetables are at one's disposal. Can be vegetarian, contain meat, or anything you like in that sense. Interestingly, the word minestrone comes from the Italian version. It does describe soup, or more literally, that which is served, and comes from the Latin root, minestrare, to serve, and sometimes called the administering of a remedy. Asking, well, having had the chance to have a little pre-coffee, I've had a glance. I'm sorry, Bob, I haven't read every last word yet. It reminds me of a little bit of a minestrone. It's got many reflections. It's not just one single strand like a pumpkin soup. It's like a minestrone. Many reflections about your life and about the life you've been called to live, about how wonderful elements like faith and service fit together. And like a minestrone, it takes a little while to absorb. It's not just simply something thrown down, but something you have to chew on. It offers hospitality, comfort, fortification, and also challenge. And it's something, like all good soups, that you share with many. There are many strands to this wonderful, life-giving soup that you have shared with us. And there's many chapters that describe all of those things. But the way in which you do it, in a reflective and gracious and yet challenging way, the amazing recall and detail, etc., is always satisfying. So thank you. It's interesting and engaging. Another quick thought. I know it's not a biography, but they often say that the secret of biography resides in finding the link between talent and achievement. And I think woven right through all of that is that particular element. Tons of talent and wonderful achievement. And finally, last night I was at the third night of the Catholic Schools Musical Festival at the Festival Hall, Adelaide. Fantastic. And the festival choir, which sings all these wonderful melodies, sang a particular melody, among which was the song made famous by Whoopi Goldberg in Sister Act, I Will Follow Him. And among the wonderful lyrics of Peggy March are, love him, I love him, where he goes, I will follow. Follow him wherever he may go. There isn't an ocean too deep, a mountain so high that it can keep me away. Woven like an invisible thread through those wonderful 12 or whatever it is sections is this deep sense of vocation, Bob. Being called, framed by love, enabled by one willing to follow. And reading through the wonderful trajectory of the book in its linear form is this wonderful sense of being always able to follow. Not just sort of starting here and ending up there, but going wherever, not the wind blew you, but where you intentionally follow. And that, I think, is part of the attraction of it all. So I think the words of that song are applicable to you too. Follow him wherever he may go. There isn't an ocean too deep or a mountain too high that it can keep you away. So thank you for having that tenacity and graciousness and inquiring mind and willingness to keep on that journey. It's a unique telling of the story of God at work in the world and how you have sought to be an instrument of communion. Merci infiniment, Robert. Vous êtes très gentil comme toujours. Et que le bon Dieu vous bénisse maintenant et toujours. Merci.
This is Sister Ruth Egar, a Sister of Mercy in Adelaide, who's known Bob for 60 plus years, but worked with him in various forms of parish ministry and other works in the lay movements with Bob for 25 plus years. So she has a very good knowledge of Bob and his work and has read the book. And so we invite her to say a few words about this publication.
Thank you, Hilary. Well, it's an honour to be able to say a few words about the little book, the interview that Hilary's had with Peter Robert Wilkinson, known as Bob. about his 60, nearly 70 years as a priest. And his naming of the book, New Visions of Priesting, might have you wondering, but I'm sure if when you're going to read this book, you'll discover what it is that Bob's talking about. You will love reading a little bit that he says about his family, a beautiful family brought up by his mother, 7 children, and filled with faith and an incredible humour that I think has got Bob through his life, through the difficulties and the joys. Perhaps more importantly, many of us will be able, in reading this story and Bob's mission, to reflect on the greater human and social journey of the world and the church during these times. They're our times too. It may help us to understand a little more of the greatness of the work of the Spirit and of Cardine in bringing Bob and us and the church and the world to a totally different place. And this over nearly 80 years. Well, yes. Almost the first paragraph that you'll read in this little book outlines the enormous shifts in the thinking, in Bob's thinking, from Christians living their life in the world to Christians taking part in the great global mission of humanity. That's a big shift. I hope you will notice it. A person, as Bob is, open to change, his study and reading being sociological as well as theological, and opened himself to listening to the signs of the times lived through the lives of the people he knew and of the larger world, have brought about these changes in Bob. I think in the Vatican documents we will have read many years ago, how important are the signs of the times, as well as our faith and as well as our action. So all of this has happened within the framework of his knowledge and faith, love of Christ and the church, and the Catholic traditions of our church. The intriguing part begins in his introduction to the seminary in 1947, aged just 14. Several years older than him, and also a student, was Joe Greeley, a former diocesan priest from Adelaide and a great friend of Bob's. Before going into the seminary, Joe had been apprenticed as a boilermaker, had strong ties to his parish, to the burgeoning YCW. This friendship became for Bob the beginning of a reading of both society and the church, which to this day has informed his whole priesthood. His capacity to communicate with the young gave him a meaning and conviction that was central to his life as a priest. So what was it that Bob met in this YCW world that was so different from his seminary training? These small groups met weekly within their parishes, young workers for the most part, who for the first time in their lives met their peers and were encouraged to listen to each other's stories. They listened and also reflected on the Jesus of the Gospels. Each week, the leaders met with the priest to prepare this meeting. The priest did not lead the meeting of the YCW. He was there to encourage and to listen, but importantly, never to lead. His was a presence of mutuality, an important formation for any priest. Always these members, young YCWs, young Christian workers, were challenged to action. They learned that they had a mission to carry out. Not only the priest, but their lives held mission and had the power through this method to transform and transcend some of the limitations forced on them by the circumstances of their lives. Through this commitment to ongoing formation, these young men and women became leaders in every place they inhabited. Some within the church, others in the world of work, in politics, in business, and other very vital occupations. They soon discovered, because of the strength of the groups meeting not just in Adelaide and South Australia, but across Australia and the world, that becoming part of this with a similar formation and training, their world became so much larger. It crossed states and nations. And eventually by about 1957, you'll find out in Bob's knowledge of Cardine and the history of the Cardine mission, that they could boast of about, I think it was 2.5 million members across the world of Europe, Asia, and Africa. Bob's experience of movements became more challenged by his chaplaincy to YCS and young Christian students and tertiary young Christian students. Amongst other commitments, he was also appointed as editor of the Southern Cross by Archbishop Bievich at the age of 26, as chaplain to the Adelaide and Christian Life movement much later, and again much later in the 90s to the neighbourhood movement of basic ecclesial communities. Hugh Mackay, one of our greatest Australian psychologists, sociologists, interpreters of the Australian way of life, speaks of a simple way of promoting self-confidence and self-worth for anyone by taking each person's life seriously, and Bob's life has certainly been a witness to that. There have been many thousands formed within these Cardine movements, and Bob, by devoting his life to this method of formation, has helped so many to choose a life of dignity and respect for others. Hilary Regan has been instrumental in helping bring about these memoirs, and we're grateful to him. I wonder if you'll recognise when you're reading this book something of the kind of church that our Pope Francis is making his mission, his greatest mission in his much older life. The synodal church for the whole world, a church of participation, communion, and mission, being worked at so diligently today across the world, and particularly in our Adelaide Archdiocesan Church and whole Australian Church. I hope you'll find much of value as you're reading this. You might discover yourself in it, so many of those who've known Bob, but if you've been a participation in the Cardine history of formation, you're certainly going to read something of yourself in this. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Ruth. And now, down at the moment, we've asked Bob to come and say a few words. Before I say that, before I hand over to Bob, I want to thank Bob on behalf of ACF Press for the work that he's done over the last 5 years in bringing this together. And it's been a great privilege and honour that we now bring this publication to fruition. So thank you, Bob, for bringing this to.
Thank you everyone for coming. It's been a delight and totally relaxed knowing you all. I think after that introduction I should clear out. Can't get any better. Here briefly, 1,100 measured words. First of all, for that, just thanks to everybody here. Well, it's not, the book is not, nor is this an attempt to cover either my life and my many relationships, nor questions facing the church. It's a very focused thought on addressing large numbers of people, trying to love by thousands. Let's say, I think of Jesus looking up and he saw the crowd and his heart was moved by the crowd. He wept over Jerusalem on the way to the cross. he said to the women there, don't weep when they weep for yourselves or for your children. Always Jesus had not only the face to face, but the capacity and the model for us of loving by the thousands. And that's all that this book and tonight are about, with any ambition. The greatest monuments of the Catholic Church in Australia might be roughly Sunday parish mass, Catholic education, Catholic welfare, the Catholic health care. Long may they flourish in our land. They are untold gifts from God that we have. And the greatest obstacles to pastoral leadership are Sunday parish mass, Catholic education, Catholic welfare, and Catholic health care. That sounds being smart. But in fact, by and large, I try never to be against things, and I generally support to the end those four things. But they are the Maginot Line of the Australian Catholic Church, unless we understand it. For those of you who are so young, the Maginot Line was the French line that ran between themselves and Germany to prevent the Second World War. They forgot about Belgium. The Germans just went up the top and came around the end. And the challenge for us is always to look at our establishment and ourselves. They're not able, those great monuments of the Catholic faith in Australia, I think, to hold the dominant culture, which in our society is what's known in economics as neoliberalism, but it's ruthless and unbridled competition. That underlies all of our attempts to reach young people. They live. It's presented as freedom, as market forces, small government. In economics, they say leave markets free. That's the most efficient. But it might also be more truthfully named as the equivalent of highway freedom for trucks and toddlers. It's a ruthless competition. Our Catholic education system is excellent, and we can't expect substantially more. I think in that degree of excellence, of faith, of skill, professionalism, it endows students with benefits for life. Those four great Catholic works absorb almost all of our available thinking and energies. They don't and they can't overcome that dominant culture that shapes young Australians generally, because they're part of it to survive. We are part of it, not they. They challenge the dominant culture in every way that they can, but they're not designed primarily to challenge. Now, this is very important to clarify what I have not said. Those four great monuments that I've listed are unmitigated blessings. We need them to flourish, and their loss would be tragic. So I'm not speaking a word against parish mass, Catholic education, welfare, or healthcare. They're as important as breathing in. It makes at least a colourful picture. I think they need, in our time, something that's proper to this time. Why do I say that there are greatest obstacles? But it's more exactly than it's not. It's our tendency to rely so exclusively. If a priest moves into a parish, his self-expectation of people is he will provide mass and the sacraments and visit the school, and the people are sick, keep the finances going. That is a pretty poor serve. Now here's another assertion. This is an assertive style. The statements are worth no more than one word. We'll see. If you agree that any organism that's not renewing itself is dying, then the Catholic Church, as we know it, has been dying steadily and predictably since 1970. Since the early 1990s, the young moving into the Catholic faith community are fewer than the death rate of those leaving. by every known measure. That's not controversial, that's just the statistics. If we take the Sunday Mass as the sign of joining the faith community, I'm not denying the excellence of young people, the faith they acquire, the goodness in their lives, but specifically of being committed and growing in the Catholic faith community. The young are wonderful people, they're leading wonderful lives, they're loved by God. They're better in so many ways than oldies like me. They're generous, they're caring. Half of them are free of anxiety, enjoying life. Half of them, as long as they're happy. But they're defenseless against our dominant culture that says winners are winners. You've only got one life, go it while you can, is a popular summary. Leave market forces free is a more sophisticated person. That makes it sound like the city market. In reality, it's, as I say earlier, it's like leaving the highway free for trucks and for toddlers. Now, that background, though, carries through to the life of all of us. Their mental health has never been worse. They're increasingly homeless. They live in fear of their bodily image. That's the fourth concern of young people, is their bodily image. They're in fear of their security, in fear of their relationships. Now, the young have no clear, enduring purpose in life, I'd say greater than themselves and those who are theirs. This is not bitching about it. I think these are very factual. They're heroic, they're generous, but a larger purpose in life. I often say to people at baptism, what do you ask for your baby? The liturgical answer is baptism. I'll say, what else would you like? To travel farther? To be happy, which is almost universal shorthand, a lovely thing. But today's young, in great part, life has no meaning greater than being happy. Self-harm is a major epidemic in our society. It's a sign of, in some form, almost self-hatred. It's a compelling sign that life has lost meaning. Jesus once looked and saw the crowd and had compassion on them, for they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he said to the women who wiped his face on the way to Calvary, weep not for me, but for yourselves and for your children. I think he says that today to all of us, but especially our young. And I think we should weep too, if we look at the crowd of today's world, not in judgment at all, but with great compassion. So, what has the power to change modern society? And this is going on 70 years of working with and studying and reading, doing sociology, everything that I can bring to bear in those 70 years. What has the power to change modern society and its vested interests? I think not hospitals or schools or church services. Here is a list of some things that haven't changed society. The women's movement, LGBT, you put a list today. You've heard of Q2, Q2 plus, land rights, Black Lives Matter, the workers' movement, independence movement, the anti-nuclear movement, the Me Too movement, pro-choice, the vegan movement, animal rights. They all have one thing in common. They're no further than that. Yes, but they're characterised by a common name. They're all social movements. What characterises a social movement is energising from the base. There is a top-down good leadership of great movements, but the movement of the life is from the base. Now, that's an observable thing. The chap that I studied with in Paris, I think, and spent his life searching for something to match the workers' movement and its power. And he said there are numbers in varying degrees. So, I mean, movements of large numbers of people energised from the base and well led at the top, energised from the base. Only self-aware, strategically shrewd, grounded social movements can prevail in any degree against today's dominant interests. That's not sort of one of those sermons, which is a pretty sociological statement. I think only self-aware, strategically shrewd and grounded social movements can prevail. You can't whistle these up for the asking, but it can be done. So I've kept the best wine for last. Jesus once said, if you're about to offer sacrifice and it comes to your mind that your neighbour has a complaint, he said, leave church. He said, leave your gift, go and be reconciled. And if there's any complaint that a neighbour has against us and against our worship, unless we start reconciling. Pope Francis makes it clear in his great lessons on ecology and climate, Laudato Si, that our planet is at risk of dying at our own hands. Unless as a church, this is the Pope speaking on Wilkinson, unless we're committed consciously and effectively to saving our planet and humanity, our worship would stand against us. St. Paul said that the earliest church we know in Corinth, they were going to the Eucharist, they were having them, the Lord's Supper, and they were not doing it with love, they were ignoring the poor. And St. Paul, speaking about their going to Mass, said, do I praise you in this? Certainly not. But the very Mass was a state. St. Paul said about the Eucharist to the earliest church, can I commend you in this? Certainly not. He said, it's not the Lord's Supper you eat. Why not? Because they were ignoring their poor. Everyone ought to examine themselves, he said, before they eat bread and drink the cup. So in Jesus' story of Good Samaritan, it was the temple leaders, the worship leaders, the priest and the Levite who failed to stop at the victim. It was a non-believer, a Samaritan of the wrong religion, who Jesus chose as the model of what he stood for. So my stone to throw tonight is this. The young are convinced and committed to that ecology movement. Will you find that mainly with the young, you know? Enthusiastic, and that's a great thing in their life, that saving the planet and humanity. The young are not self-centered here. They see beyond themselves to one great purpose, to save our common home. That's what the Pope calls the earth. Pope Francis says Christians, and Catholics certainly, must be part of the movement for Mother Earth. The Pope goes further, he says, we can't save the earth unless we save humanity. That's what's particular, if you like, about the Catholic contribution and the Christian contribution. You can't just save the earth. Only people living free, unoppressive lives can save the common home that we share. Now that's not just as a good deed we're talking about, stuck on the end of English somehow. Social justice always sounds a bit like Stanford, I think. One of those things that if you're into that sort of thing. Mother Earth needs her Christian children. Christians, and so the Catholic Church needs to be part of that movement to save our common home. Now, how can it be made real? The last 100 words. To begin, the Church needs, again, Catholic schools, but they would be disarmed without, and Mass would lose its meaning without, eventually, and the young, I think, couldn't put this into words, a strong worldwide youth movement for the environment. A Catholic worldwide, to the scale of the YCW, totally different in many ways, not one class of social class, but some things are in common. Cardine has left us, and Adelaide has treasured the great truth of faith that Ruth mentioned, that every person is chosen by God to be the instrument of God's love, day by day, when and where they are. Not just good people, not just Christians, not just Catholics. He said that, which God says in the Gospel so many places, the original vocation. That we each and all of us have a mission from God to transform where we are, when we are. A fresh Catholic youth movement for ecology, I believe, must be the church present shoulder to shoulder with the ecology movement at large, and ecology present to the church. To be a successor to the wisdom of YCW and other movements, there can be no movement for a larger cause, such as the environment, without commitments to the worlds of home and work and society. So it's a small group to group need and project. It's also thousands by thousands. But this really isn't there. Carlton started with half a dozen young needle workers, seamstresses. Within a year, there were 1,000 in that district. By the 30s, their weekly, not their weekly, their newspaper in France had 750,000 circulation. This is pretty hard-headed stuff, and only God will know the timing and the possibilities. But I think the young Christian ecology movement, not necessarily that name, by the young, of the young, and for the young, can and will recover the faith of the Gospels and of the Church in Australia. Thank you.
I might start by introducing you as Carmel Brown, who was a YCS worker and a TYCS worker in Australia for many years, and knew Bob since the 1970s. And so we're very honoured and pleased to have Carmel speak about Bob's book here now. Thank you, Carmel.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Carmel Brown, and I first met Bob Wilkinson in 1972 at the National Exec meeting of the Young Christian Students. 50 years later, almost to the month, I'm deeply pleased to still be calling him my friend, and very happy that there is finally an account of elements of Bob's remarkable life interwoven with his vision of church and humanity. So good on the ATF via Hilary and Gabriel for taking and persisting with the initiative, and Bob for his commitment and energy in presenting his life and vision. I'm putting it out there. I deeply appreciate the opportunity to speak about 3 areas, among others, which stopped me in my tracks when I read the text. So those 3 areas have to do with placing the church within the project of humanity, Bob's belief in and the strategic importance of youth, and the distinction he makes between formal and informal faith formation. Now, on the first one, I expect Ruth and Bob have more to say about Bob's analysis with regard to the church, priesting, and his hope for a movement based on ecology. But with regard to that, several sentences in the text struck home to me, or brought it home to me. So, for example, page 82 says Bob, earlier I saw the priest at the service of Catholics in their daily lives. I still see that, but now located within the mission of humanity to save the planet. Given that COP's happening this week, that even has more importance for me. Bob links that vision to the question of what distinguishes humanity, which is itself, at least among some people I know, it's a contemporary question. I love these words. The arrival of humanity has its day, a little less than the angels, a little more than the beasts. What's more, with reference to humanity and creation ecology, he says, we have responsibility. Other animals do not. That nutshell is really enough, but I have to recognise that in stating his claim, Bob recognises other people or other parties like scientists and Australia's own First Nations connection to land, and Pope Francis's hope that there is, quote, an irreplaceable religious vitality within any authentic global ecology. Finally, in Bob's words, to be faithful to Jesus Christ means wholehearted planetary ecology, where the defence of planet's animals and climate this is what I like, is crowned by global commitment to human equality and dignity. So he links a lot. And now, I think this is really interesting. In committing to hope, our Bob does not ignore the darkness of the church. I think this is really important. For example, sex abuse, which he refers to on page 90, and it's worth a read. It's quite intricate. And he acknowledges the assumption that the church is only hanging on. So the second point, which was to do with youth, it's a little indulgent on my part, this bit, but it links with his abiding interest in youth in terms of the vision of church and humanity. Bob was appointed by the bishops to be the chaplain to the National YCS, and on page 46 he says, I finally joined the meeting in 1973. Actually, Bob, it was December 1972, between Christmas and New Year. I was there. I know that's right because I was there as the Melbourne YCS staffer and friend of the national team. Says Bob, I love this bit. The team of 4 students I joined was made up of 3 long-haired boys. He doesn't name them, but there's Kevin, Roger, and Michael, and a girl, Annie. And he says, looking less radical, but no less effective. And he says, my first novelty was being examined by the students as a job applicant. Now think of this, he'd already been appointed by the bishops, but the students said, hang on, we need to say whether this is a good move. And he says that students should claim the right to accept me or not gave me heart. Bob, I suspect it also gave you a migraine. Now of the team, he says, they may have looked unkempt by my black suited dress code. I began to discern over a year this thing they valued so much, authenticity. Bob, vice versa. There is no doubt about that. Back to the text, he says, it was my conversion, that time of his contact with the YCS was a conversion to a radical movement. Now here, Bob, I think he refers to a link with the International YCS, which developed from that year. And his link, as is well covered in the text, included at the time student leaders in some countries being killed by regimes. Okay, there's much more to say in the text with regard to his international experience, especially that bit, Hilary, you'd remember this on the link with John Monmouth, Papua New Guinea. And then the third point is with regard to the distinction he makes between formal and informal faith formation. Hilary, cut me off if I'm speaking too much. But that link with formal and informal rings a bell with me because of having been a teacher across sectors, both schools, university and TAFE, where incorporation of experience is something I have worked towards in my own work, and at least in some areas is much more these days commonplace. So my antenna was up when I read that, on that distinction between formal and informal. So I had several reads. The agenda, he says, of informal formation, as in lay movements, finds its unity not in the subject or issue, but in the complex life of the participant. So he makes the point that the agenda of the more formal is the curriculum, which yes, as a teacher, I get that. But in terms of lay movement, it's the life experience of people, which is the starting point. He takes that further. So what are the implications of that for the institutional church and priesting? Now, there are times, Bob's not exactly, he's not sort of, he doesn't go along to marches and waves the banner, but he actually is quite radical in some of his assertions. So he challenges the implications of that point of the distinction between formal and informal for the institutional church and priesting. So he says on page 32, is there a major oversight in the investment of Australian pastoral energy? We have scarcely examined, he continues, over the last 50 years, whether institutions, texts and courses have so merited church attention that nothing comparable in resources and thinking has gone into the apprenticeship model of faith formation that voluntary lay movements once offered. Now, I don't think, and having read the text, I know that he's not saying give away Catholic schools or adult theology. but the difference that he makes is quite significant. Now, if you've got time, there's a couple of just final notes that I'd like to make. Here's a question I asked when I was reading the text. Was Bob's appreciation of Cardine, or his love for really, Cardine in YCW, strengthened by his own working history? Because I hadn't known this, but read the text, because he says during seminary days, Bob worked as a postman, a messenger for Elder Smiths, conductor on an interstate train, the now Indian Pacific, and customer service with Myers. And he describes his work with the Southern Cross as factory experience, because he had to go on the ground as the manager. He had to go down to the printers. Secondly, Bob's acute attention to social dynamics. For example, and I think there should be a thesis on this, he links the use of cars with the decline of parish life. He notices that priests are trained to give sermons while the young are not interested in sermonizing. There's something in that for all of us. Thirdly, and finally, he's deft and often witty way with words. Even the title, priesting. Really? There's this secular friend of mine, and I was telling her about it, and she said, oh my God, the millennials would like that tendency to create verbs out of nouns. Somewhere else in the text, he even refers to depthing. Now, Hilary, I wonder if that was a typo. Depthing. Okay, finally, while the title emphasises priesting, this is a read for all of us. Bob's profound love of and hope in the church and humanity leaps off the page. I reckon this is a text to pore over, and let's all look for our own gems. Okay, thank you.